The snow was coming down in serious sheets by the time anyone noticed him. He was face down in the drainage ditch beside Grover Mill Road, one arm tucked under his chest and the other stretched above his head, as if he had been reaching for something when he went down. And he had been there long enough that the snow had begun to accumulate along his shoulders and the back of his coat in a way that made him look like he was becoming part of the ground. 3 cars passed. 2 of them slowed slightly. None of them stopped. The temperature had been dropping since noon. It was 4:17 in the afternoon. A man face down in a ditch in rural Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, in February did not have the kind of time that allows for 3 cars to pass. Then a mud-caked truck pulled over on the gravel shoulder, and the passenger door opened before the engine was fully off. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with us until the very end, because what this Marine discovered about how that old man ended up in that ditch is something no one in Clearfield County will ever forget. We read every single comment. Staff Sergeant Lucas Hale, United States Marine Corps, retired, had been driving back from the hardware store in Phillipsburg with a box of pipe fittings on the back seat and a shepherd named Ghost in the front one, when the dog lifted his head from the window and went rigid. Not alert, rigid. There is a difference that takes time to learn, and Lucas had learned it. Alert is ears and interest. Rigid is the full body going to zero. Ghost's eyes had fixed on the ditch line 200 yards ahead, and he had not blinked, and he had not made a sound. And that was enough. Lucas was 39 years old, and carried his size the way men carry it, when they have never thought of it as size, just as the body they moved through the world in. He was 6'2", built square through the shoulders and chest, with dark hair cropped tight, and a jaw that had been set in the same expression for so long that his sister described it once as his factory setting. His eyes were pale gray-green, steady and thorough, the kind of eyes that moved systematically around a room the way a second hand moves around a clock face, not anxious, not paranoid, simply continuous. He had stopped explaining this habit to people years ago. They either understood it or they didn't. He had done 3 deployments, 2 with the 2nd Marine Division out of Camp Lejeune to Helmand Province, and a 3rd with a combined forces unit in Ramadi that he described, when asked, as complicated. He had come home from Ramadi with a Bronze Star with Combat 5 that he kept in an envelope in his truck's glove compartment. A nerve injury in his right thigh from a fragment that had passed clean through the outer muscle and missed everything important by a margin he still thought about on quiet mornings, and a general wariness about the distance between what people said was happening and what was actually happening. He had settled in Clearfield County because it was where he was from, and because the particular quiet of central Pennsylvania in winter, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than empty, was the only kind he had found he could sleep in. He had been there 8 months. He was not yet sure he was staying. Ghost was a 6-year-old German shepherd, 76 pounds, with a coat that ran pale silver gold along his flanks and darkened to iron gray across his back and the tops of his ears. His right ear carried a notch at the tip from a detonation clearance in 2022, where the pressure had been closer than it should have been. The kind of incident that fills out a report and doesn't make the news, and the scar had healed clean, giving that ear a slight asymmetry that made his face look permanently alert even when he slept. He moved the way purpose-trained dogs move in civilian life, always just slightly ahead of the pace of the world around him, processing information on frequencies most people couldn't hear. Lucas had fought the military working dog adoption program for 7 months. He had made 11 phone calls and written 4 letters and driven to a facility in Virginia twice in person. Ghost had been at his side in the truck for every mile of the 8 months since. He was not a pet. He was the person Lucas trusted most. The ditch ran along the east side of Grover Mill Road, where the tree line broke and a cleared field began, and the snow across the field was moving in long horizontal curtains that dropped visibility to a quarter-mile. Lucas smelled the cold before he felt it, the particular clean sharpness of Pennsylvania winter air with ice in it, the smell of nothing alive, the smell of a world that is indifferent to whether you are in it or not. He moved down the slope of the shoulder toward the ditch without running. Running changes what a scene is before you have understood it. The man was breathing, shallow and slow, but breathing. Lucas got his arm under the man's chest and turned him carefully, the way you turn someone when you cannot be certain what is broken and what is not. And the man's face came up out of the snow. He was old, very old, with the particular ancient quality of a face that has been outdoors in all weather for a lifetime. His eyes opened. They were dark brown and deeply creased at the corners, and they focused on Lucas with an effort that was visible. "Don't move," Lucas said. "I have you." Ghost stood at the man's head with his body facing outward, toward the road, ears forward. His name was Raymond Cutler. He was 81 years old. He had a gash along the left side of his head above the ear that had bled into the snow under him, and his coat, a thin thing, a dress coat, not a winter coat, was soaked through. He had no gloves. He had no hat. He had been wearing house shoes. In February. In Pennsylvania. Raymond Cutler had not wandered outside. He had been put there. Lucas learned this the same way he had learned most things worth knowing in his life, by listening completely, without hurrying the person doing the telling. The ambulance took 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, Raymond talked, and Lucas crouched beside him in the snow with one hand on the old man's shoulder. And Ghost remained at his head, and the snow came down, and Lucas listened. Raymond Cutler had spent 31 years as a foreman at the Clearfield paper mill before it closed. He had a Silver Star from the Korean War in a frame above his fireplace, awarded for an action on Hill 355 in October 1952, that he said had been largely a matter of not having enough time to think about what he was doing. He had been widowed for 9 years. He had a son named Preston, who lived in the house with him, had lived there for the past 2 years, ever since Preston's second divorce, and who managed Raymond's finances because Raymond's eyesight had declined, and the online banking was difficult. Preston received Raymond's Social Security and his small union pension directly into an account Raymond had never seen a statement from. Preston gave Raymond a weekly cash allowance of $60. Preston had told Raymond 3 weeks ago that the house was going to have to be sold because of property taxes that were overdue. Raymond had asked to see the statements. Preston had told him they were complicated and that Raymond wouldn't understand them, and that Raymond needed to trust him. This afternoon, Raymond had asked again. He had asked at the kitchen table with his Silver Star visible on the wall behind him and his 81-year-old hands folded on the table in front of him, and he had asked with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who has earned the right to be answered honestly. Preston had told Raymond to go outside and get some air. He had told him this while opening the back door. He had put his hand on Raymond's arm when Raymond didn't stand, and Raymond had stood, and Preston had guided him through the back door in his house shoes and his dress coat, and he had gone back inside and locked it. It had been 34 degrees and dropping. Raymond had made it around the side of the house and down the driveway and 40 yards along Grover Mill Road before his balance failed him on an ice patch, and he went into the ditch. The ambulance arrived. Lucas rode with Raymond to Clearfield Hospital and used the time to make 3 phone calls. The first was to a veterans benefits attorney in State College named Janet Wren, who had handled a neighbor's estate dispute the prior spring, and who answered on the second ring and said she could have a financial exploitation complaint filed with the Pennsylvania Department of Aging by close of business. The second was to a Clearfield County Sheriff's detective named Harlow that Lucas had met at a VFW function in October and who had served 2 years with the 82nd Airborne before law enforcement, and who picked up and said nothing for a long moment after Lucas finished talking, and then said, "I'll want the son's name." The third call was to Raymond's neighbor, a woman named Clara Sims, who Raymond had mentioned twice in 11 minutes, the way people mention people who matter, and who confirmed without hesitation that she had seen Preston Cutler's Audi in the driveway all afternoon and that she had been worried about Raymond for months and had not known what to do about it. "You tell Raymond that Clara says she should have called sooner," she said. "I will," Lucas said. He did not know yet that Preston Cutler had, that same afternoon, called the county assessor's office to ask about the timeline for listing the property. He had listed himself as Raymond's authorized agent. He had spelled Raymond's name correctly on the form. He had been conducting himself as Raymond's authorized agent with 6 separate financial institutions for 22 months. Lucas did not know this yet. He would know it by 9 o'clock that evening. What he did know, sitting in a plastic chair outside Raymond's room while Ghost lay against his boot and the hospital worked around them in its fluorescent, purposeful quiet, was that the 34 minutes between Preston locking the back door and Raymond going into the ditch were not an accident and were not a lapse of judgment and were not anything that could be explained by the kind of language people reach for when they want to believe that families are basically trying. Preston Cutler had calculated the temperature. He had assessed the time of day. He had looked at an 81-year-old man in house shoes and a dress coat and done the arithmetic and decided that the arithmetic was acceptable. That was the thing Lucas could not set down. Not the money. The money was theft, and theft had a process. It was the arithmetic. It was the particular coldness of a man standing at a locked door doing math about his own father. Ghost pressed his head against Lucas's knee. Lucas put his hand on the dog's neck and did not say anything. There was nothing to say. There was only what came next. And what came next required a clear head and a controlled voice and the patience to let the system work in the order it was built to work, which was not the order Lucas would have chosen, but was the order that would hold. He made one more call. It was to Detective Harlow, and it was brief. The emergency room at Clearfield Hospital was the kind of room that fluorescent lighting was built to make feel manageable, without ever quite succeeding. A flat, forgiving brightness that washed out shadows and made everyone look like a slightly earlier version of themselves. Raymond was on a gurney with a warming blanket and an IV, and a nurse named Deborah, who had been doing this work for 23 years, and who did not ask unnecessary questions. Ghost was not permitted past the entrance, and so he sat in the corridor outside the double doors with his chin on his paws and his eyes on the doors. And the security guard who came to ask about the dog looked at Ghost for a moment, and then looked at the way Ghost was watching the doors and walked away without saying anything. Preston Cutler arrived at 6:51 in the evening. He came through the main entrance with his coat open and the expression of a man who has had 40 minutes in a car to decide which version of this situation he was going to present. And he had decided on concern. He was 46 years old, clean-shaven, the kind of soft-faced, plausible man whose confidence reads as competence until you look at what's behind it. His shoes were expensive. His watch was expensive. He had been living in his father's house for 2 years, and his father had $60 a week. Preston Cutler was not unknown to the people of Clearfield County. He had worked for 11 years as an accounts manager at a regional insurance brokerage in Clearfield City, which meant he knew the names of people who mattered and had learned the art of being present at the right moments and invisible during the wrong ones. He was a member of 2 civic organizations and had served on the board of a local food bank for 14 months before resigning to attend to family obligations, which was how he had phrased it when Raymond's condition had become useful as an explanation. His two ex-wives had both, independently and without knowing about each other, described him to friends using the same word: plausible. Not good. Not bad. Plausible. The kind of man who could sit across from a county assessor or a bank manager or a worried neighbor and say the right things in the right order and leave the room having been believed. He had been doing this for 22 months. Nobody had called him on it. Nobody had checked. He came through the corridor and saw Ghost first. Ghost did not growl. He did not bark. He stood up from his position outside the double doors and placed himself in the center of the corridor, and his hackles rose in a slow ridgeline from his shoulders to his mid-back. And he fixed his amber eyes on Preston Cutler and was still. Completely still. The kind of stillness that is not calm, but its opposite. The specific quality of a trained dog that has made a determination and is waiting for instruction to act on it. Preston stopped walking. Lucas came through the double doors behind him. He introduced himself by name, rank, and branch without inflection or ceremony, the way he would have introduced himself at a command briefing, because that is what this was. He told Preston that Detective Harlow of the Clearfield County Sheriff's Office had that afternoon obtained authorization to review the financial records associated with Raymond's accounts, and that attorney Janet Wren had filed a formal complaint of financial exploitation with the Pennsylvania Department of Aging, and that Clara Sims had provided a written statement regarding her observations of Raymond's living conditions over the past 8 months. He said all of this standing between Preston and the double doors, with Ghost at his left heel, in a voice that did not rise and did not waver and did not leave space for interruption. Preston said, "You have no idea what you're talking about." "The account statements will tell that story," Lucas said. "Not me. My father is confused. He has been confused for 2 years. Anyone will tell you. Your father told me about Hill 355, Lucas said. He told me the name of the man next to him. He told me the temperature that morning in October 1952. He told me every account number you control and the approximate amount in each one. He told me your watch was a gift from a woman whose name isn't on any document in that house." Lucas paused for exactly 1 second. "Your father is not confused." Preston's mouth opened and closed once. "I'd suggest the same thing to you that I suggested to him." Lucas said, "Call a lawyer." Tonight, 2 people in the corridor near the admitting desk had stopped moving. A man in a Carhartt jacket had his coffee cup halfway to his mouth and had not completed the motion. A woman in scrubs near the water fountain had turned without appearing to mean to. Nobody spoke. Preston Cutler left. Ghost watched him go. Detective Harlow arrested Preston Cutler at the Cutler house on Grover Mill Road at 8:45 the following morning. The charge was financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and theft by deception. The forensic audit that followed over the next 10 weeks documented 22 months of unauthorized withdrawals and redirected deposits totaling $61,200 from Raymond's Social Security benefits, union pension, and 2 savings accounts that Raymond had not known Preston had access to. Preston's attorney attempted to argue diminished capacity on Raymond's behalf, which required a cognitive evaluation that Raymond passed with a completeness that the evaluating physician described in her written report as notably strong for a man of any age. The property tax delinquency that Preston had used to threaten the sale of the house did not exist. The taxes were current. They had been current for 11 years. Preston Cutler pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of theft by unlawful taking and received a sentence of 4 years with mandatory full restitution. His name was removed from every account and document connected to Raymond Cutler within 30 days of the plea. He served 14 months before a parole review. The watch was returned. 5 months after a February afternoon on Grover Mill Road, Raymond Cutler sat at his own kitchen table with his silver star on the wall behind him and a cup of coffee in front of him, and the particular settled quality of a man who has been restored to something he should never have been taken from. The property taxes were paid. The accounts were in order. Clara Sims came for dinner on Thursdays and had begun to stay for the second cup of coffee, which Raymond had started making sure there was enough for. He had asked Lucas once, in the early weeks, why he had stopped. Lucas had said that Ghost stopped first. Raymond had considered this for a moment and said that he supposed that was the right answer. On the last Saturday of the month, Lucas drove the 12 miles from his place and brought Ghost, and Ghost would go directly to Raymond's chair and press his broad silver-gray head against Raymond's knee and stay there for a long moment before finding his spot on the floor beside the table where he could see both doors. Raymond had started telling the Hill 355 story again. Lucas had heard it 4 times now. He never asked Raymond to shorten it. The 4th time, Raymond had added a detail he hadn't included in the first 3, the name of the chaplain who had been there afterward, and Lucas had understood that Raymond was not repeating the story so much as recovering it, piece by piece, from the place Preston had put it when he had spent 2 years making Raymond feel that his own memory was a burden and not a record. The nerve injury in Lucas's right thigh ached when the weather was cold, which in Clearfield County in winter was most of the time. He had stopped thinking of this as a problem. He sat at Raymond's kitchen table with the smell of coffee and wood smoke in the air, and the particular kind of quiet that belongs to houses where someone has chosen to remain. And Ghost lay between them on the floor, with his chin on his paws and his tail moving once, slow and certain, in the yellow afternoon light coming through the window above the sink. Something in Lucas that had been waiting, he hadn't fully known it was waiting, stopped. He was staying. Sometimes miracles don't come as fire from the sky or voices from beyond the clouds. Sometimes they come as a dog going rigid in a truck seat on a county road in February, and a man who has learned to trust that rigidity pulling over without needing to know why yet. God does not always prevent the cruelty that finds good people, but there is evidence, quiet, repeated, unmistakable evidence, that he places certain people at certain intersections at certain moments. People who have been trained by sacrifice and shaped by loss into exactly the instrument a particular moment requires. Raymond Cutler survived a war on a Korean hillside in 1952, and survived decades of ordinary life, and survived the particular cruelty of betrayal by someone who should have protected him. He survived all of it, and the reason he was at his own table on a Thursday evening in July with coffee and the smell of his own house around him was that a German shepherd looked out a truck window and would not look away. We pass those moments. We pass them every day. The question is only whether we stop. If Raymond's story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to know that good people still pull over. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you have ever known someone who was taken from by a person who should have been their protector. Your story matters, and we would like to hear it. It may be the words someone else needs today. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the quiet courage of ordinary people, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, keep your home warm, and remind you, always, that you are not walking through this world alone.